Day 9, 12 Days of Christmas Painting Challenge, Flower Bouquet of Alstroemerias and Greens. Here is the real composition. I put it on my cardboard to look at it from all different angles. And here's the line drawing, which is available for download and with an elastic eraser removing excess amount of graphite off the paper. Let's mix watercolors. As you noticed from the real reference, there's reds, greens, and whites. I will be using alizarin crimson, perylene maroon. For the first mix, it makes really rich red watercolor mix. Separately, I'm placing permanent rose. I see some very light pink color tones on Alstroemerias, lemon yellow for the yellows more in the shadow of reds, perylene violet. There's also quite a lot of perylene violet in the shadows, on some petals where we see in the center these darker parts. Perylene violet will do a wonderful job. For the greens, I'm taking sap green. And of course, you can mix using pigments that you already have. Perylene green for the darker part. And for the leaves that are on the side, they are really cool green watercolor mix. Starting to paint with fine tip brush, applying water, and I'm using first mix of alizarin crimson and perylene maroon. You can use cadmium red, Sennelier red, Winsor red. Try watercolor pigments that you have. At this point, I don't have Sennelier red in my watercolor set. I have it separately, but I'm just curious, how can I use other pigments if one pigment runs out? And I'm placing, starting from the sides of the petal and moving towards the center part. On the lower part, I'm adding a little bit of permanent rose, leaving center of the petal white. I will place there some greens and violet. The very tip of each petal has a little green color tone, as I have real subject right beside me and a reference photo as well. I can compare. I can really compare watercolor mixes. I can look from different angles on the petals, on leaves. This is so good to have real subject. If you can, time to time, take a simple subject, photo it, make a reference photo, and leave it right beside your painting and compare watercolor mixes. Real subject gives us more information. When we have a photo, other thing is when we do our own reference photos, we are more familiar. But if we are handed in completely strange reference photo, it's even harder because we don't know which time of the day it was taken, what was around, maybe some unrecognizable angles of some petals, and we just can't get all the information from a strange photo. So I always encourage, do reference photo yourself, and you can definitely do that. You just need to start and practice. It takes a little bit of practice. For example, for today's composition, I started with different subjects. I had other winter berries and other flowers. Then I tried to change. I twisted, moved it, changed the location of flowers. First there was 2 whites and 1 red, then only whites with green. And I took maybe like 30 photos before I ended up with what I like the most. Never rush the process when you are thinking about the reference, taking photos. Majority of time, finding and building and taking reference and making composition, for me and for other artists, it is longer than actual painting. You need to really think through every detail. Don't rush this stage. If you will rush, then you can end up with not so good looking composition, and you will feel something is off, something is not. It's maybe because you rushed in. You wanted to paint really quickly, but rather spend extra time on reference and building composition, and then the painting will be a joy. I'm continuing painting each petal. Where is smaller part of the petal, I'm going straight with watercolors and looking at reference photo and also composition right beside me. Also, it's important to notice that this is a sketchbook study page. It's really small, downsized the size of this composition, and I'm going with just few layers to achieve a result. I'm not aiming for super realistic. I want to have a really beautiful result, sticking to realism still, but it will not be so worked through as we used to do on paper and spending on one flower head hour, sometimes hour and a half. For this composition I spent 1 hour, and it is quite fast for such a rich composition with flowers and greens and bow, because it's only like a study. This would be an amazing study for bigger work. The same composition can be done a much bigger size, or it's a really nice for festive season, like Christmas card idea or little painting to give to your loved ones. Don't underestimate small work practice, fast work practice. They are really helping us understand watercolor mixes, practice our brush work control, and gives us a nice practice, not spending super long time, super great effort with maybe some stress and all that comes with it, but just have a little painting session and be done and be happy with the result. For now, flower is done. I will get back to it when I will have other flower head and the rest of the composition. Now I'm moving to this leaf, which is in the background and it's in the shadow. Also leaves beside them. These little leaves are important. Not for the whole composition, but especially for that white flower that we have in the front. Everything that is surrounded with this white flower is helping us make white flower more realistic. If there would be only this white flower without any leaves and flowers and bough, it will be very pale, especially when we are doing a quick study painting. But those greens, those little leaves, are helping us to get attention to the white flower as well. Adding more alizarin crimson and moving on to the second alstroemeria flower. Really festive color of this alstroemeria flower, really beautiful and rich. I really like festive season with the classical colors, reds and greens and golds. They really make a more warmer feeling of the season, and all good things are really good and nice feeling, gives nice feeling of all the festivities. And this composition also represents the classical Christmas colors, and white alstroemeria gives a nice fresh look of like a snow in Christmas time. Adding lemon yellow to my Alstroemeria petals. I can feel that and see from the real subject in front of me that, especially in the shadow, the reds are really warm, and by adding yellow we instantly get much warmer and vibrant layer of this red watercolor mix, and it really changed the way these flowers look as I added red. So always experiment, try new things. Don't stick just what you see, oh it's red and I will use only red pigments. Think about, you can place even watercolor samples of maybe bright pink. If you will place it right beside this flower, you will notice, no, it's not so cool, it's not so pink, and maybe you can place a violet and yes, it's more to the violet side. Or you can even place yellow and you will notice that the yellows come out of these flowers when the more bigger piece of yellow color is placed beside. Adding a little bit of cast shadow area, separating petals with the shadow, not with outlines but with shadows. I want to free up space on my mixing palette and mix really small amount of gray watercolor mix for the white flower. Taking super small amount of ultramarine blue, taking lemon yellow that I have on my palette, and also mix from red ultramarine, which is alizarin crimson with perlin maroon, adding a little bit of ultramarine blue, and everything is done in micro pieces, in micro amount of pigment. We want a really light gray watercolor mix, adding a little bit more ultramarine. And as I was mixing this gray, I noticed that there's a lot of more greener gray watercolor mix on this flower. It's just because it's reflecting some greens from leaves. Maybe leaves that are behind this flower are also visible on flower petals. Adding a little bit of green to the bottom part of the flower. Applying shadows. And when you are painting white flower, you need to look not on the white parts of the flower, but all the little things like shadows, spots, some little flaws. Those are helping us to build a white subject on white paper. You don't need to even think about the white area. It will stay white and it will come out. I noticed that there's a little gap between petals and background leaf is visible through, so I'm also painting that because it is helping us to separate these two petals. Placing lemon yellow in the middle, and there is yellow, I can clearly see from the reference photo and real flower that is in front of me. I'm avoiding those little stamens that we have in the center. Even this is really small and tiny, but my brush is even tinier and I can freely paint in between stamens. So when you are painting white, think about shadows, think about spots, everything else except white. Mixing watercolors of lemon yellow, green watercolor mix, and a little bit of reds that we have, and I have brown color for the green stem. With the tip of the brush, applying this watercolor mix as thin as possible. This composition will look beautiful if those greens have a really thin stem. If you will paint a thick stem, you can ruin this composition. You can even paint a line, a thin line. That will look much better than a thick looking stem. For the leaves, I'm taking perlin green diluted with water. And for the shadow parts that I have already on my palette, sap green, lemon yellow, and perlin green for the shadows. Moving on to red bow, and for that I'm taking alizarin crimson. We'll be using pearl in maroon, pearl in violet. Also lemon yellow to make it warmer, adding together with permanent rose because in the lightest parts there are a lot of pink color tones. You can use pigments that you have. Be sure to experiment with watercolors that you have in your paint box. I'm applying quite a lot of layers and watercolor mixes to this bow. I want to make it really rich and intense, like it is in the reference and as it is right beside me. Even in real life, it's even more saturated, more intense. It takes many layers to get to the saturation that is required for this red bow. Zooming out, looking at the whole composition when it's almost done, and now you can put extra effort, extra work. Now I'm placing a little bit of more alizarin crimson mixed together with lemon yellow to get a warmer red watercolor mix and apply to Alstroemeria petals to make them a little bit different than the bow. I want to separate them in color tones so they are not the same. Also, some few Alstroemeria leaves are more yellowish green, and I think it's eucalyptus leaves. They are much cooler. When we have multiple subjects, we need to think about color tones. It's important. We don't want to end up all greens looking the same green and all, for example, pink flowers look the same pink. We need to somehow separate. So that's when we start to ask questions like, what is more red, pinker, or more yellowish? For example, here I can see that Alstroemeria flowers are more yellowish red, but the bow is more pearlin violet and pink. That's how I'm separating, even that they look very much alike also in the reference photo. Adding some final touches, little things, like here I forgot to paint stamens, so I'm adding stamens with Perlin Violet, looking at the whole composition, looking at some details that I can add, maybe make leaves that are in the background in the back, I can make them more intense. This is the time when you can push yourself a little bit further. Even in this sketchbook study page, in this little composition study, you can put extra effort. Thank you for painting. Thank you for following this challenge. I hear so many positive feedbacks from you all, and seeing your work is really heartwarming experience. Thank you, and see you tomorrow on day 10.